Hello and welcome to the Magic Mirror podcast. I'm your host, as usual, Khan, the Trinket Mage. And with me is my co-host, 33 Elk.
Hello.
Today's podcast, we have a fun topic. We're talking about good and bad made for Commander cards. We're going to talk about different categories of cards that they make for Commander and how we think it affects the format, for better or worse. And then after that, we'll follow up with some questions from the question zone. But before we do all of that, I gotta thank today's sponsor, Card Castle, the easy way to sort your collection digitally. If you use our link in the description, you get 1 free month of premium access, and you can start sorting your collection today. Thanks to Card Castle for sponsoring the podcast. Okay, 2 announcements. 1, no snail this week, so everybody in the comments, if you could just type what you think Snail would have said, we can piece together his third of the podcast, comment by comment. It'll be great. And then we have a follow-up from last week's episode with the game store in Denver.
Yeah, so for those that didn't watch last week, I have moved to Denver. I live here now, and I've been hired on by Elysium Games in Lakewood, Colorado. They are a cafe and game store. From last week's announcement, we got a good half dozen people, about what I projected. So it was really nice to meet some of you. And if you didn't hear about it, you're hearing about it now. Most of the information was given in the first 5 minutes of announcements in last week's podcast. So if you're interested, if you're in the Lakewood area of Denver, go check that out. And I'll see you Friday Night Magic.
So let's jump into our main topic here. Would you like to start off with your first example of some made for Commander cards? Now, I guess I should clarify. We mean cards that were printed in a Commander-only set first. Although, in theory, we could point to things in standard sets that were clearly designed with Commander in mind. We're being flexible here.
Yeah, so I do kind of want to extend this to the viewers. There are just shy of 2,000 cards whose first printing were in a Commander-focused product. And so if we don't talk about one example of good or bad design that you feel like you have a strong opinion about, feel free to leave it in the comments below. I love reading the comments, and this is an especially good week to voice your opinions on certain 4 Commander cards, because we're not going to get to all of them, and maybe even disagree or agree, especially with some of our opinions today. I feel like starting off, just talking about absolutely horrific designs. Everyone knows the Ikoria free spells. As I feel like this cycle specifically traumatized people when it comes to the concept of 4 Commander design, because they're just so especially poor in terms of play pattern, design, everything.
Yeah, the only one is the green one that nobody really cares about.
Yeah, the one-sided fog, which is still decent, but at least it isn't as horrifically obnoxious as, let's face it, the blue one's the actual worst. And then red and white are very close behind, and then black, it's definitely annoying, but it's not the worst. For reference, the Ikoria free spells are, if you control your commander, you get to cast the spell for free. Blue gets a negate, which is counter target non-creature spell. Red gets a redirection effect, so you get to change the target of a spell. Black is an exile, a target creature. Green is a fog, prevent all combat damage that wasn't dealt by creatures you control, so it's one-sided. And white is giving all of your creatures indestructible. I feel like in this case, backgrounds very much serve as a better version of these cards in terms of design, not strength. In that it's a thing that gives your commander a bonus sort of thing for being in play, because backgrounds are face up, right? Backgrounds are from Baldur's Gate Commander Legends. Basically, they have an effect while your commander's in play. They're all enchantments, and they all enhance your commander in some way or make your commander do something cool or powerful. But these are not free and from hand and a surprise, right? They're face up, they're in play, etc. So I definitely think backgrounds were a better version of this effect, and I hope they never reprint, or not reprint, but repeat this mistake.
The blue one, Fierce Guardian Shipping, especially Egregious, is terrible, because the way these cards are designed is they want you to just snowball your commander even further. And the ones like Deflecting Swat and Fierce Guardianship, which are defensive, kind of push that play pattern even further. And I think that play pattern in Commander is awful, where you play your overpowered snowball card from the command zone, and then you just have it get bigger and draw you more cards and does everything. And then when somebody goes to remove it, you're like, here's my free get out of jail free card, so I can just keep, pushing with the same card over and over again.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. For me, like I mentioned, backgrounds, way better implementation of like, this thing buffs my commander or gives my commander some like cool thing on top of it, where these free spells fail miserably at doing that. And also, there's a card that also comes to mind, Timely Ward. It's 2 and a white for an aura, and when you cast it, you can cast it. It gives an enchanted creature indestructible, and you can cast it as if it had flash if it targets your commander, right? I think this design is really cool versus the free spells, which are just like abhorrent because at least you have to hold mana open, right? It's the buff for putting it on your commander isn't that much higher than putting it on a card sorcery speed, but it still has that flexibility. I think it's cool versus, the free spells. Anyway, I'm sure you had free spells in mind as well when you're thinking about horrific designs for commander stuff.
Oh yeah. These are like the first things that come to mind.
That's exactly. So I suppose we'll move on. Is there any sort of like absolutely terrible design in your mind that sort of like poisons the well when it comes to for commander design?
I mean, the first card that actually comes to mind is Dockside, which is already gone, so we don't really need to talk about it. But I would like to extend that to Teferi's Protection.
Yeah.
So if you don't know what Teferi's Pro does, it's 2 and a white. Until your next turn, your life total can't change, and you have protection from everything. And all permanents you control phase out, and then it exiles itself. So this is like the be-all, end-all, best, I like to call them get-out-of-jail-free cards. You play it and you're basically protected from like everything. No matter how bad the situation is, how much power your opponent has on board, how much damage they're throwing your way, you just play this and you're good to go. And it's mono white, which means it's very splashable. It's very easy to play in any deck. If it was like triple white, I would be so much happier with this card. But in 5 color, 4 color, 3, any color combination that wants this can probably play it, and it wins so many games by itself in Commander. It's ridiculous.
Wasn't this first printed in the Vampire Precon as well, Edgar Markov? Like, what is Teferi doing in there? Anyway, sorry, that's just something I just remembered off the spot.
He's a vampire, obviously.
Yeah, we've said our piece, the song and dance between Teferi's Protection and removal. I personally do like when protection is stronger than removal, and Teferi's kind of is a symptom of that arms race problem where Psych Rift is very good, Toxic Deluge is very good, right? These cards are insane. And to keep up with it, they kept printing better and better protection because they kept printing better and better wipes. And now we have Teferi's Protection, which I do agree is a design mistake. I still run it because I hate Psych Rift. But I feel like Clever Concealment and Guardian of Faith are better implementations of these designs. I won't get into the exact wording of those cards, but basically it's the Teferi's Protection phasing out everything without giving you protection. So you can phase out your permanents or your creatures only in the case of Guardian of Faith, but you aren't protected as well, right? That's a big problem with Teferi's Protection. If Teferi's Protection just phased out all of your permanents, the card would be pretty bad. And like it's still somewhat playable, but pretty bad, right? Because you're phasing out like everything and then you're vulnerable, but because it prevents life loss and damage, it's like pretty nightmarish.
Now I'm sure most people listening probably already assumed we were going to say that those are bad cards, but let me hit you with a card that I think is very, very poorly designed for Commander, and I think it will be a bit of a hot take.
I'm excited to hear it.
Tempt with Discovery.
I have this one under horrific designs in my notes. Okay.
So Tempt with Discovery is 3 and a green for a sorcery. It has Tempting Offer. Search your library for a land card, put it on the battlefield. Each opponent may do the same thing. And then if they do, you do as well, which means if all your opponents get a land, you are getting 4 lands.
And they're any lands too, by the way. This isn't search for a basic. It is any land you want. Right next to this one, I have Expropriate. I've made my hatred for this card known before. Expropriate says each player votes for time or money. For each time vote, you take an extra turn, and for each money vote, you steal a permanent they control. So, right next to both Tempt with Discovery and Expropriate here, I have in parentheses cards that scale with stupidity. The worse your opponents are at the game, the better they are, which is never a fun design, especially when you are the opponent who says the right option and your other 2 opponents are especially vacant that day. Yeah.
I completely agree with Tempt with Discovery. I think Expropriate is sort of different because I think a lot of players will recognize that Expropriate both options are technically bad, although I agree with you 9 times out of 10 or 99 times out of 100, let's say. The extra turn is way scarier than stealing a permanent. Totally agree with you. Tempt is... I didn't put Expropriate on my list because it's just kind of like a powerful finisher. Even if everybody plays it correctly, it kind of does what it's intended to do and everybody knows what it does. You take an extra turn and you steal 3 permanents, right?
Yeah. I do want to make it clear. I'm not saying Expropriate's a good card. I think Expropriate's bad in terms of power level.
Really?
I don't think it's that strong if people vote right. But the thing is, it's also 9 mana. Keep in mind, you're never paying 9 mana for that card. But
yeah, that's true.
You get to the point where you have 9 mana, you probably deserve to win that game anyway. It's just the frustration of resolving it, where it's okay, guys, we all should vote money here. And I've had people flat out say, well, you can have your commander stolen if you want to, but I'm not going to let my guy get taken. I'm voting time. It's well, great. The Narset player really needed that extra turn. But yeah, no, I hate these designs with a passion, very much so, because I feel like cards that feel like someone got screwed over because of an opponent's choice is not a fun play pattern to have. You know what I mean?
Man, maybe I should be. Maybe people don't know what I'm talking about with Tempt with the Discovery. You should not take any lands.
Yeah.
All of the opponents should say, no, thank you, I'm good. Because I played this in my Foxglove deck, and I built that Foxglove deck specifically so I could play a big control deck with Tempt with Discovery and Tempting Contract. These cards that I think if people play poorly into them, they absolutely pub stomp, and they do. The games where I Tempt with Discovery and they gave me all the lands, I would absolutely dominate. It wasn't even remotely close. And it just feels bad because it's I'm just beating players who don't know how strong this card is.
So I do want to kind of flip this on its head and talk about a little bit about good design, how this can be done. So I think Tempt with Discovery, Expropriate, all the tempting offer cards and stuff like this, the vote cards, they interact with your opponents in a kind of bad way, versus cards that interact with multiple opponents without scaling to the number of opponents you have. I like these cards a lot. So a good example is Sower of Discord. 4 black. When it enters, you choose 2 players, and whenever one of the players is dealt damage, the other one loses that much life. So this is really fun because you pick 2 opponents, and then if any beatdown happening on one opponent happens to the second opponent as well, they lose as much life as they do, which is really fun design for a multiplayer format. And keep in mind, it doesn't scale to the number of players you have. It's just fun when you have multiple opponents.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, there's another way to do vote cards fun. A perfect good recent example is Prisoner's Dilemma.
Yes, one of my favorite cards.
Yeah, everyone loves this card. 3 red. Each opponent secretly chooses Silence or Snitch, and then the choices are revealed. So if everyone votes Silence, it deals 4 damage to each opponent. If each opponent chose to Snitch, it deals 8 damage to each of them. And then otherwise, it does 12 damage to each opponent who chose Silence, but not to the people who chose Snitch. So it's a really funny sort of actual Prisoner's Dilemma, if you know the psychological experiment. It's a very fun card. This sort of also feeds into another example of good design, which is like Mario Party type cards, which just like are silly and goofy. Arjun, the Shifting Flame, is another good example here. It's a 6-mana Sphinx, and whenever you cast a spell, you put all of your cards on the bottom of your library and then draw that many cards. Hilarious. Like, this is like a 6-mana moron that does basically nothing except for get you a bunch of card draw triggers. Like, you can build around him and make him strong, but it's 6 mana, right? This is totally fair and fun. Going back a little bit more to cards that interact with multiple opponents in fun ways, there's a card called Beckoning Will-O-Wisp, and there's a few other cards that act similarly to it, which I find really fun. Which Beckoning Will-O-Wisp is a 3-mana 1/3 flying. At the beginning of combat on your turn, you choose an opponent, and any creature attacking the last chosen player gets +1/+0. So you choose player A, and any creatures attacking player A get +1/+0 now. Even your opponent's creatures attacking player A. And then next turn, you can choose player B or player C, right? So very cool cards. I really liked Sower of Discord and Beckoning Will-O-Wisp and Prisoner's Dilemma for interacting with multiple opponents without necessarily getting stronger with each opponent like Dockside would, right? These are cool designs in my opinion versus tempting offers and Docksides.
Yeah, I think the only downside to some cards like this is things like Prisoner's Dilemma, they do take a little bit of time to resolve. So if your deck is full of these effects, games can go long. So, try and keep it snappy, I guess, if you're going to play these.
Yeah, that's very fair. With any sort of voting card, that it's like you should really be on top of it. Make sure people got their pens and pencils ready for writing down their votes.
Moving off of voting, but still another politicsy card that I like, Brina the Demagogue.
Love Brina.
Yeah. A black-white 1 for a 1/3 bird warlock. It has flying, and then whenever a player attacks one of your opponents, if that player has more life than another one of your opponents, that attacking player draws a card, and you put 2 +1/+1 counters on a creature you control. So it's a bit convoluted, but basically, whenever one of your opponents who isn't your opponent with the lowest health gets attacked, that player draws a card, and you always get to put counters on something.
Yeah.
So it incentivizes players to attack, not you, so that they get to draw cards, and you always get counters on things. Super sweet commander, really awesome in the 99. It's just such a fun card. I love this card.
Yeah, no, I love Brina with all the different +1/+1 counter creatures we've been getting, like Dusk Legion Zealot, or is Zealot or Duelist, my bad. Dusk Legion Duelist, which says whenever you put one or more counters on this creature, you draw a card only once each turn. And there's another one, Fetid Gargantua, 4 and a black. It has Adapt, so you can put counters on it once. But also it says whenever you put +1/+1 counters on this creature, you Night's Whisper, you lose 2 life, draw 2 cards. So these cool cards that also make the counters from Brina draw you cards anyway. Really funny. Yeah, no, Brina's sick. I like that. That's another great example of the cards I was talking about, which is like it doesn't necessarily scale to the amount of opponents you have. It kind of does.
Yeah,
but it interacts with them. But at least the scaling to your opponents is +1/+1 counters versus like a whole card draw, like, or ramping yourself or etc. Like Brina doesn't feel as consequential, but still punchy enough that it doesn't feel bad, like you're doing nothing. I have listed here, I took a few notes for this podcast, examples of mediocre design, and I haven't really touched on any of these yet. It's mostly just been good, bad. So I feel like I want to talk about 2 cards that are basically in every commander deck, Command Tower and Arcane Signet, and I want to hear your opinion about these cards.
Okay, cool. You know what? It's funny. I was going to ask you about these too, so that works. I'm going to talk about these separately because I have slightly differing opinions on those. Command Tower. I like Command Tower. For very dumb reasons, mana bases are very expensive in this game. Fetches, shocks, and obviously reserveless dual lands are not printed as much as they should be. Same with Triomes, same with most of the good color fixing. Having a good untapped Pentaland that can go into any commander deck that is cheap is really good for the format. Like, as for players, especially for newer players who don't have a huge collection where they can build a great mana base. Like, this is a land that can help you get to where you need to be consistently. Arcane Signet, same thing still applies. I think it's good that there's a good 2-mana ramp that's cheap now. It was expensive when the card first came out. Cheap now that pretty much everyone has access to. But I wish it wasn't a ramp. 2-mana ramp is so powerful. It feels a little different than Command Tower, which is just an untapped land. Kind of wish it was just Command Tower 2, but it's fine.
I totally agree with you. I think Command Tower being in the game is a boon because I have literally written in here in my notes, not everyone likes min-maxing mana bases as much as I do. It's totally fair that you just want to like jam some cards together and run with it, right? And also, of course, the monetary aspect definitely plays a big reason why I like Command Tower existing. Arcane Signet is definitely a design mistake. And I think Command Tower would be a design mistake if the format wasn't singleton, right? Or like if there was like multiple Command Towers that existed, then we're starting to get into some like issues in terms of like, well, you know, like at what point does the skill of building a mana base just not even matter anymore if every land, you know, you can jam in a Command Tower? But that's not the world we live in, so happy for that. Arcane Signet, definitely a bit more problematic for the reasons you've said, but overall, like, these are a mediocre design for me. I don't feel like they're harming the format per se, but they're not like, I can't give you a gold star for these designs, right? I don't know if you've also noticed this, just still talking about mediocre design. Have you noticed recently that like every precon has like an on-theme one-sided board wipe?
No, I don't buy. I don't really buy precons or look at them that hard, so I have no idea. I haven't looked at a precon list in a while.
So like Crimson Vow, Olivia's Wrath, each non-vampire gets -X where X is the number of vampires you control. Wave Goodbye and Ixalan, return each creature without a +1/+1 counter on it to its owner's hand. So like each precon, it feels like every precon release, one of the decks has a one-sided board wipe for the theme that the deck is. And don't get me wrong, I do like that. I do like one-sided board wipes more than just like I wrath everything and then we're going to take 10 more hours to finish this game. But it feels a little bit weird to have like just like here for this strategy, we've printed a board wipe now. So now this strategy has a one-sided board wipe, right? Like Party got it in Commander Legends Baldur's Gate. I can keep listing it forever.
Tinfoil hat. They don't want to ban Cycryphs because they want to keep selling Cycryphs. So they're just going to give everybody their jank Cycrypt.
Yeah. And then also extending off of this a little bit, I think Akroma's Will is an example of like a really lukewarm design. I don't know if anyone else feels this, and I don't know if you feel this. Like having your finisher be like made for Commander, it feels a little bit boring. Right? Like Akroma's Will, like might as well just say this card wins your game of Commander for you. And it makes it feel a little unearned. Like it's not a horrific design, right? The game has to end and this is a fine way to end it. But like it feels weird to have a finisher printed in a Commander set for you to use as a finisher, right? Like, I don't know if that's just like dissonance on my end or not.
I don't know if I've ever lost a game to this card.
Akroma's Will, it's a decent card. It's very good for like white board decks, right? Like you got to build your board and then it's a white Crater Hoof kind of.
But it gives double strike. So if I have all 1/1s for my white token deck, it's like...
Yeah. For reference, Akroma's Will is 3 and a white. If you have your commander, you can choose both modes. And then one of the modes is mostly defensive and the other mode is mostly offensive. And it like gives lifelink, double strike, flying, indestructible, like a whole slew of words that just... But it's mostly for white mid-range. So I'm thinking like angels and stuff, like building a decently sized board. I've lost to Akroma's Will plenty of times. And also white-green decks can use it very well as well.
So I agree with you that, like, yeah, if you have like a made for Commander finisher, maybe it feels a little less spicy. I was just commenting on the fact that I think I've never lost to the card before.
Yeah, no, like I said, Akroma's Will is far from a horrific design. I don't think this card destroys Commander or anything. I just think it's like a little lukewarm, and I'm using it as an example of a bigger sort of deal, right?
Yeah, I get what you mean. Yeah, I feel like finding a fun finisher is like really hard in Commander because a lot of times there are these kind of effects that are kind of like built for like, oh, if you're playing artifacts, you can play this and then you win the game, and it was designed like that. And it feels less like you're building a deck and something else that Wizards has built for you.
Yeah, I get that a little bit too. So like the thing is like I don't feel this for Octavia Living Thesis, right? Octavia is this big octopus that discounts herself by 8 mana. She's like 10 mana normally if you have 8 or more instants and sorceries in the graveyard. And then Magecraft, whenever you cast an instant or sorcery or copy one, you get to make a creature into an 8/8 until end of turn. So it's this big like matters sort of commander that is a finisher technically, that was printed in a product, but I like the card versus a Chroma's Will.
But like that's so many more steps than a Chroma's Will. A Chroma's Will is like you have a board and you're like, I'm gonna give it double strike and unblockable.
Okay.
Whereas this is like, I need to have a board of tokens, play Octavia, and then go cantrip to turn them into 8/8s.
And the creatures have to be evasive as well. Yeah, no, I see it now. Yeah. So yeah, I think I just have a problem with the Chroma's Will. Just like this is like generic, like sort of like I win. Let's go. So yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I was gonna say I have an example of an mediocre design that I think is kind of it's more of this mechanic. So are you familiar with the Undaunted mechanic?
Yeah, costs 1 less for each opponent. I almost said you control.
Yeah, so for example, Seeds of Renewal is green and 6 for a sorcery. It has Undaunted, so it costs 1 less for each opponent you have. So unless an opponent has lost the game, it costs 4 mana. And then it says return up to 2 target lands from your graveyard to hand, and then exile Seeds of Renewal. So 4 mana double regrowth, pretty good. If an opponent is gone, 5 mana double regrowth, kind of mid. And then 6 mana double regrowth is pretty bad in a 1v1. So this mechanic is interesting. I'd like it in the fact that this probably can't break Legacy because it's designed in a way that you're only going to have one opponent. So it's even though these go into Legacy, they're not going to break it, which is a nice thing. But I really hate that the card never, ever costs the number printed on the card.
Yeah, I mean, that's good for Emoti and stuff, like cards that care about high mana value cards, but you want to cast them lower.
Yeah, it's just like annoying to figure out.
Yeah,
exactly. To, like, think every time. These cards are fine, right? Like, I think Divergent Transformations, if you've ever played a partner Divergent deck, like, come on. It's super sweet, right? You play your 2 partner commanders, and then you Divergent Transformations to double polymorph into some other wacky thing. I did that for a bit in a Grixis deck, and I would polymorph into a Notion Thief Whirlpool Warrior, which is a wheel on a creature. And those are the only creatures on my deck, and you just go whoop, and then you take draw 21 cards. Oh, you're so sweet. But like, the cards are fine. It's just this mechanic's so mid. It's so weird.
Yeah, it's a symptom of early commander design where the designers are sort of feeling out like how can we interact with the multiplayer nature of the format. Oh, I know. What if we make the cards cost less for each opponent you have, right? It's sort of like uninspired. This is where we get Eminence from. Ooh, a little bit of a mistake there if we want to touch on it. Like, just like pretty bad. Like these sort of experiments in the commander design space, right? Experimenting with the command zone, experimenting with the number of opponents you have versus like gimmicks for gimmick's sake instead of like actual design.
I feel like any mechanic that is uninteractable is problematic. So Eminence is uninteractable, right? I can't stop the Ur Dragon from making your dudes cost 1 less. Like, you always get that benefit no matter what.
Yeah.
You could say the same for what am I thinking of? Initiative, Monarchy, things that are like difficult to interact with.
Yeah.
And also emblems are, I think, also fall into this category, although emblems are generally hidden behind such a huge cost that they're not really problematic.
Yeah, that's a fair assessment. I mean, for Eminence, I actually do like a Rabo quite a bit, though. And I feel like it's because it's like the weakest one a little bit, but also because it incentivizes combat. You know what I mean? I kind of like that about it. Like Edgar Markov doesn't incentivize combat, even though it looks like it on the surface. I think Eminence can be well designed. Like imagine an Eminence downside, right? Like a commander that like actively debuffs all of your stuff if it's in the command zone or in play, or a Eminence that tracks things over the course of the game. Like whenever you gain life, you get a counter off of the Eminence, and then when it enters, you can spend these counters in some way. That might be cool. But the way that like Eminence on Inala or Edgar or even Sidar Jabari sometimes feels like too much Eminence. I don't like the design space of that.
Now, I want to hear your opinion on this, but I say that this does not extend to experience counters. I actually think experience counters are kind of a brilliant way to do things, because compared to Eminence, you still have to play your commander and do the thing and farm the experience counters. And then, yeah, you get this benefit when it comes back, but then there's also proliferate and like other niche things you can do. And, you know, some of this experience counter commanders are quite strong, but a lot of them I think are pretty fair and pretty sweet.
I think experience counters was a far more developed version of Eminence. I actually really do agree with you that I kind of like experience counters. I feel like there's some instances where it is poorly designed. I think a good example of this is Marin and even Kelsey and the Plague, where their experience matters right away. So for Marin, you get to reanimate something big if you have a lot of experience counters from your graveyard, as opposed to returning it to hand. And Kelsey has just haste, so you just like barrel someone through with like a 26/26 commander if you manage to do your thing. So I feel like those are sort of more poor because the experience counters matter right away when you cast it, versus some of the other ones where it's like a lot more of like a slow roll sort of, my commander does grow over time and you have time to interact and stuff.
Yeah, if Marin didn't give you the regrowth, if it was just reanimate for experience counters, the card would be like much fairer in that sense, because you're always getting value regardless of experience counters, you know?
Yeah, there's also just cards that have been printed like Sun Cleanser or Mutated Cultist. They have more effects, but you can remove counters from opponents, right? It's way more interactable than an Eminence commander is, unless they revert Rift Sower or something, or Rift Sweeper. Let you retuck commanders into the deck.
Can I talk about a card that is almost really great for commander?
Yeah, sure.
I have beef with the card Rite of the Raging Storm.
I kind of like it. You need to sell me.
Okay, 3 red for an enchantment. Creatures named Lightning Rager can't attack you or planeswalkers you control. At the beginning of each player's upkeep, that player puts a 5/1 red elemental creature into play named Lightning Rager. It has trample haste, and at the beginning of the end step, sacrifice this creature. Card is almost really cool, except for the fact the damn elemental doesn't have to attack.
Oh, it doesn't goad it? Oh no, that's so sad.
I know. I did this. I had the same exact thing. I played the card, and then like the dude went to pass turn, and I was like, "You didn't attack with your lightning," and he's like, "I don't have to."
Yeah. Oh man,
and
you
I was
also
like,
get.
Oh no.
Also, let's give a 5/1 to the Skull Clamp deck. It's really funny with Mayhem Devil, right? You can enable it a little bit, but for 5 mana, I don't know. I want those things to be goated.
I wish it was goated. The cooler, more fun version of this that I love is Life of the Party.
Yeah, Life of the Party is the other card that that is very similar.
Yeah, real quick, it's 3 in a red for an 0/1 elemental. It has first strike, trample, and haste. Whenever the Life of the Party attacks, it gets +X/+0 until end of turn, where X is the number of creatures you control. Then, when it enters the battlefield, if it's not a token, each opponent makes a token copy of it, and those tokens are goaded for the rest of the game.
Yeah, it's just hilarious.
Oh, it's so awesome. I mean, when you blink it, you can just like flicker it and like give everybody more party elementals, and the party elementals are like slamming into each other because they block horribly. It's an 0/1, and it has first strike, trample, haste. So like, you might as well take the damage and not block with your Life of the Party, so you can attack them with your Life of the Party. It's so funny.
I'm really happy with Life of the Party because it isn't like indestructible or anything, right? Like you can like a well-placed first strike block will kill it. It's just up to your opponents to do that. You're going to get some damage out of the way. Like I agree that Life of the Party, and it's also just an example of this sort of like Mario Party kind of design I was talking about before. It's definitely funny. Speaking of Life of the Party, I generally am fond of any card that incentivizes combat in Commander. So Miri Weatherlight Duelist is an example of a commander I really like. one white green or one green white for a 3/2 first striker. Whenever it attacks, each opponent can't block except for more than one with more than one creature. And as long as it's tapped, no more than one creature can attack you each combat. So you get to swing out, and then people swinging out have a bit of a hard time getting back at you. Another example is Gut True Soul Zealot. This is a background commander, so you can pick a background. But also, whenever you attack, you can sacrifice an artifact or creature, and when you do, you make a tapped and attacking 4/1 skeleton token with Menace. Insane card. That is so much damage, 1/10 of your life total. And you also get a free sack on the way in. Pretty cool if you build a sacrifice deck out of her. And third example might surprise some people. I really like Kalia of the Vast as a design. Kalia used to be a big scary monster, right? Ooh, if you don't remove this, they're going to win the game. I think removal in the modern age has made Kalia look a lot more wimpy. And now it's just all nostalgia for me. There's no salt when I see a Kalia across the table and they start dropping big monsters into play. It's like any Naya player does this for free off of dinosaurs and stuff. Like, let the Mardu player have some fun. And at least they have to attack, right, to get it. Kalia of the Vast, for those uninitiated, 1 white, black, red, 2/2 flying. And when you attack, you can put a demon, angel, or dragon into play, tapped and attacking from your hand.
Yeah, I think I don't like Kalia because I don't like commanders that are all in on like either I get no value from this card or so much value they kind of have to remove it. I think those are not great designs, but combat oriented and combat focused commanders are great because inherently in commander like combat is not as powerful as combos and things like that. So incentivizing and benefiting players for doing so is really great. And a lot of players already don't attack enough as is. So giving them more incentives to do so, I think, is great. So yeah, more of that stuff. More, Brina, we already talked about earlier. More stuff like that.
Yeah, I would have agreed more harshly against Kalia like a decade ago. But I don't know. Kalia makes me feel warm and fuzzy. I feel like, removal's gotten good enough that she isn't that big of a threat anymore. But I get she's definitely the most Timmy example I could give. I do have one more horrific design I want to get out of the way. And I'm sure people have already typed their angry comment about it before I got around to it. And this is a plea to Wizards of the Coast as well. It is not too late to errata Yuriko and Commander Ninjutsu. It's not too late. You can still do it. Please make it Commander taxable. I'm so tired of Yuriko.
I've barely seen Yuriko do anything. I don't. People have such a hatred for this card. I seriously haven't seen anything very scary.
I am blown. Yeah. So it has less to do with the fact that Yuriko. Well, first things first. Yuriko is good. I don't think it's a starter to say Yuriko isn't good. At least in the past, she was incredible, right? Am I wrong?
She's powerful enough to see CEDH play. You're correct. The card is strong. Yes.
Okay, good. I was like, at least in past, she's seen CEDH play. I think it's less to do with the fact that she's oppressive. She is sometimes, but it's less to do with the fact that she's oppressive and more to do with the fact that she's just so annoying. And she doesn't have to be this way. Commander Ninjutsu is its own mechanic that you can just errata to have it be command taxable. Gavin Verhey flat out said that this is the worst design mistake he's ever made in Commander. So for me, what bothers me the most about Yuriko is it almost, you get rubbed in when they cast Abjure, sacrifice a blue creature. You want to be sacrificing Yuriko every turn to unblockable her with an Ornithopter or whatever, right? Because ninjutsu's like that. I don't know. The card is just so stupid that it always comes back for 2 mana. Anything that cheats Commander tax is really annoying. Derevi too, but Derevi's sort of aged kind of poorly, right?
I agree the card is mega lame and not interesting. I don't know, in my casual games I've just never been very impressed with the power level of the card. I know it can be strong, but I don't know. Maybe it's just the Yuriko decks I've run into just kind of...
I'm sure people fill the Yuriko deck with I'm playing my Ninjas deck. This is a Ninjas deck. I'm sure that's a lot of Yuriko decks. But the Yuriko decks run Brainstorm. I put Scion of Draco on the top. You all take 12. I Vamp Tutor in response to the Yuriko trigger. I nuke your life totals. It's okay. And then it's really hard to interact with because they're blue. And also because it's always 2 mana. And I don't know. If you run into a Yuriko deck that's well built, it's going to be a nightmare. Anyway, that's the end of my thoughts for Made for Commander designs. This entire podcast was just so I can complain about Yuriko.
Your master plan revealed. Yeah, there's a lot of good and bad Made for Commander designs. There's a lot that I really like, and a lot that really sucks. I want Wizards to print less of the things that are just generically good, and more of the things that are interesting and difficult to make good, because that is how I think Commander decks should be built.
Yeah, I agree, but there's a little bit of a dangerous slope that can go down where a card can be like niche and interesting and for a specific thing, but if it's too for that specific thing, you can kind of get left with no choice but to run it. So like Tom Bombadil, which like is just like uber sagas. Why would you play any other saga commander when you can play Tom Bombadil? Like there's almost no competition when it comes to the strength of it. And sure, there's like some interesting specific techs you can do with, say, a different saga commander, but Tom owns sagas, right? And that's the kind of niche design I don't want to see. Sort of designs that are like, this is specific for this archetype, and now all decks that are this archetype are going to run it for all time. But I do agree that niche designs are better than broad designs. It's just you have to do them carefully.
I don't even think it has to be niche. I think it just has to have a few extra hoops to jump through, right? Like with the Octavia Living Thesis example, right? Octavia is just a blue Spellslinger commander, which is not something we haven't seen before, and it's not super niche or super specific, but it requires you to have spells and also have tokens and also
evasion and okay.
Those. Yeah,
I get you. So the more hoops, the better. I like it.
I think so. Yeah,
I think that's a good metric.
But everybody in the audience, let us know what you think. Let us know what you think Snail would think.
Yeah, absolutely excited for the comments on this episode.
Okay, moving on to the question zone, where we answer your questions. If you have a question for us, you can put question zone in your comments to help us find it, or you can tweet at Elk or I, or Blue Sky us, whatever you would call that. Links in the description. First question, Psychedelic Seawell. Sewell? I don't know. Question zone. Sorry if I'm late to the party on this, but why do you have 100 Ragnar decks on your Moxfield page?
Yeah, I need to know why too.
Okay. I wanted to see if I could mess with the stats on EDH Rec, so I was just kind of fiddling around with them. You'll see that they're almost identical, but have a slightly different number of basics. And I was just trying to fiddle with them. You can't with that small of a change, actually. On EDH Rec, it requires to have X amount of different cards before it counts it as a different deck. Otherwise, precons would have an even bigger effect on that. So a precon versus another precon with 3 changes probably won't get counted. So yeah, I was just trying to see if I could mess with some EDH Rec data for an old ancient video that is probably still up. But yeah, that's why I have 100 Ragnar decks on my Moxfield page, which I don't use Moxfield anymore. So you should use my Architect page, which is in the description here, and follow me there, because that's where I will have my updated commander decks that you can look at. I have beef with Moxfield, and I'll make a video about that one day. Agent Murphy 286 asks, how do you navigate individual skill discrepancies at a table? Is this even an issue?
So I don't think it's really an issue if there's a bunch of different skill levels at a table. If you're talking about how do you improve your play against someone who knows their stuff, the answer is play more Magic. There's no real way around it. But if you're catering to a bunch of new players, right? Foundations onboarded your friends into Commander and Magic in general, and now they want to play Commander with you. And, it's kind of like baby's first EDH night. Just read your cards and sort of explain what they do with your other face-up cards on the board. EDH can be so difficult to track, and I feel like this is where a lot of the sort of barrier to entry comes in, is there's just so many permanents in play sometimes. So just really guiding opponents through what your value loops are on the battlefield, what's triggering where and why and what, really can help new players. Now, I'm not saying tell them what's in your hand or like give them information they don't already have, but to like help walk them through a value engine or something in play. That is something that can really help sort of onboard people easier into like EDH and playing the game, right? Especially a new player who doesn't know the cards by like art and name and etc.
Yeah, I totally agree. If you need to up your skill, you just play more. And if I'm playing at a table and there's a player that I feel, or just is a new player, like, I'll help them out or I'll vouch for them if they want to take something back. If they're like, oh, I didn't see how this worked, I'd be like, yeah, go ahead, take it back. I'll just like take the initiative and say that, because it's way harder for the other people to be like, no take backsies. Once I've already told them they can take it back.
I'm a perma take backsies player. We're here to like have a cool game and stuff. Like if you walk into something that was obvious, like of course take it back. Like I don't really mind that too much. If there's just like, sometimes EDH is so hard to track, especially if you're in like the fourth game of the night or something, something like that. Like it totally makes sense.
Yeah, I'm fine doing no takebacks as long as that is established.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
Like if, you can't be loosey-goosey with it. It's either, all takebacks are fine, or not all, obviously, but like if I counterspell something, you can't be like, whoa, let me take that back. Like if there was, information on board, like, oh, I could have made this indestructible. Do you want to take that back? If it was like obviously there, I'm totally fine with that.
Yeah, walking into a Chalice of the Void or something. Like, I mean, like, yeah, exactly.
But if you're like, hey, no takebacks, like, that's good. I'm fine with that. But I will be asking you 100 times what is on your board, and I will take it slow and I will take it careful.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
you're gonna have to play that way because you've decided to play that way, which is fine. It's just, you got to know what you're getting into. Okay, those were from 2 weeks ago because last week we didn't have enough time to do Question Zone. So now I'm going to do from last week. Okay, Cormit B9X asks, Question Zone for Elk specifically. Where do you find good gameplay videos to watch? I've been trying to find them for a while, but with no luck.
Okay, so my go-tos, Bosch and Roll, Brian Koval. He does Legacy, any sort of Eternal Magic stuff. Love that guy. He is very good. Multiple championship winner, like Eternal Weekend. He's the proud owner of multiple Black Lotuses from that event. Very good player. Very good, easy to learn from him. He explains everything very perfectly. His videos are almost like a podcast in a way where you can just like listen to them and you can like imagine the board state if you've played Magic for enough. Very incredible guy. Aspiring Spike for Modern. Recently he's been doing a lot of Standard too, which was very fun. Aspiring Spike is probably the most entertaining streamer currently, not including me. Of course, I'm the best, but very awesome creator, very funny, always innovative new brews, because his mastery of Modern and the formats he plays is just so high that he can just like come up with anything. It seems, and it's always something fresh and unique. It's his name's Aspiring Spike, but he's really a Johnny, right? Like he makes the format his own and sort of makes his own brews, which I really appreciate. And then my last suggestion for you is definitely Luis Scott Vargas, LSV, for Cube Limited, all sorts of that stuff. Perfect channel to watch. Very dry humor, which I appreciate, and also very good at the game. A lot of good insight into drafting and Limited and whatnot. Those are my 3 recommendations for you.
I'll second Aspiring Spike. I've been watching Spike for a little while. Cool dude. I met him IRL at Magic 30. Really nice guy. Okay, next question is from Junior24.
On Spotify.
Questions on Spotify. Yes, we have a Spotify. You can follow on Spotify if you wish. I need to eventually get a full RSS feed, so it's on like all platforms, but I don't know. It's being weird.
Ugh, work. Yuck.
Question Zone. What are some underrated commanders you would love to see more of? So I took this as we should pitch a commander that they should, like somebody should build. Thane the Broker.
Oh, I love Thane.
Right? 2 and a black for a 3/3 human warlock. You can tap, sacrifice a creature, put 2 +1/+1 counters on target creature. You can tap, remove a counter from a creature you control, make a treasure. You can tap, sack an artifact, make a 2/1 Flying Inkling, or you can pay 3 and a black to untap Fane. Now, this card is so underplayed. There's 272 decks on EDH Rec. It's nothing. Nobody's playing this card. And it's not even some like weird old ancient card. It's from like Strixhaven or whatever. There are so many things you can do. One, you can go mono black, like modular artifacts, where you play like Arcbound Ravager and you're like sacking artifacts and like sacking creatures, putting counters on things. And then you do like artifact aristocrats. You can go mono black +1/+1 counters, or you can play things that want to have counters removed from them, like Unstoppable Slasher, which puts stun counters on itself. You can remove stun counters to make treasures, and then untap your commander to remove more counters. It's pretty sweet. You can do all sorts of fun things here. If you are looking for an artifact deck and trying to do something unique, this one's pretty different. And it's like, no matter which direction you go, there's enough support for it that you're going to find finishers and stuff for it. But it's like it's a fun little twist or spin on the mono black aristocrats type stuff.
Okay. I think I have mine as well. By the way, Fane is an incredible card. It's very versatile and very cool. Mine's a little more narrow. It's Brunor Battlehammer. 2 white red for a legendary creature, Dwarf Warrior, 5/3. Each creature you control gets +2/+0 for each equipment attached to it, and you may pay 0 rather than the equip cost of the first equip ability you activate each turn. So at first you're like, ew, Boros, like equipment commander, right? Like kind of boring, overplayed. The thing is about Brunor is I think this is like the sleeper Sunforger commander. Paying your first equip is 0 each turn. So with Leon and Shikari, which says it's a 2-mana 2/2 that says you can activate equip abilities as though you could cast an instant or like at instant speed. So you can go equip Sunforger for free once each turn, including your opponent's turns. And then you're set at that point, right? Because you can just start tutoring up instants and sorceries, Mistveil Plains to rebuy your instants and sorceries by putting them on the bottom of your deck. A lot of fun to be had there. I originally used to play Sunforger in Sir Gwyn, which makes your equipment have Equip Knight 0. But I think the 2-mana discount on Brunor actually matters quite a bit as opposed to Gwyn.
Man, I love Sunforger.
I love Sunforger too. Yeah,
that's so cool.
Definitely more narrow than yours, but I think Brunor doesn't get as much love for being a Sunforger sort of deal.
All right, I think that's good for the question zone. Yeah.
Yeah, I think we're done.
Okay. Sweet. All right.
Yeah, I can only stand being around you for so long without Snail. Ugh, terrible.
Yeah, what would Snail say here? He'd probably say something like...
He'd say something like, cut it in the middle of the sentence, this podcast is done.